When I began my career as a PhD researcher, there were two major technological revolutions just getting started, the digital and the genetic. And one of the biggest challenges that I faced back then was deciding where to focus my time. How could anyone choose between working with one of those subjects but not the other? Each was on the cusp of defining the 21st century. And all this time later, we see just exactly how much influence they've had. But it was only about 10 years ago that I could see how crucial it was that we brought closer together those worlds of biological sciences and digital technology to recreate each other's worlds and to allow humanity to embark into the next phase of its evolution as a hybrid species functioning across multiple planes of reality. And it's esports that finds itself at the center of that convergence. Esports are worlds in which we find innovators, creators, makers, and performers seeking to reimagine our lived reality, the spaces in which we collaborate and compete, the skills we need to take humanity into the brave new worlds of artificial intelligence, immersive realities, and so much more. And yet you'd be absolutely forgiven if you've never heard of esports. The truth is that you're likely to be in the majority. And even if you have heard of them, you probably haven't played them, and you certainly haven't seen any competitions. And if there's one thing I hope to convey to you by the end of this talk, it's how esports are transforming the world in which you live, whether or not you can see it yet. But just to start us off, let me tell you what I mean when I talk about esports. The biggest and most dominant part of this community is composed of people who play competitive computer games from their consoles and keyboards. It involves teams working together in gaming battles in pursuit of just the kind of glory that we see around all sorts of other elite competitive worlds. Whether it's sports, music, filmmaking, television, these are all communities of people seeking excellence in their performance. And whether it's the pure fantasy worlds of League of Legends or StarCraft, or the hyper-real combat spaces of Call of Duty or CSGO, what unites these players is the social community that enables their competitive skills to flourish. I think this is also why there's such a heated debate over whether esports can be called sports in the normal sense of the word. It's clear to me that there's a great deal of common ground in the kinds of virtues and habits and behaviours that we see develop amongst that player population, and indeed in its entourage as well, the people that support the production of those kinds of events. And yet it has been a world in which we've seen such controversy around that connection between those two environments. Many people in the world of gaming think that their pursuit is so far from the world of sport, they want nothing to do with them. And people in the world of sport blaming gaming behaviours for sedentary populations or for children turning away from sports in pursuit of other activities. And so one of the big conversations has always been whether esports can become recognised as credible, legitimate, normal sports. And I must admit, I rather like the idea of esports entering into such events as the Olympic Games programme, because it will send two really important messages to the world. It'll tell the sports world that they need to keep evolving to ensure that they remain relevant to a younger generation who are changing their habits of activity and content consumption in remarkable ways. But it'll also tell the rest of the world that gaming is good. And for years, we've seen all sorts of moral panics emerge around gaming. Concerns about the risks to young people's health, the possibility that it leads to antisocial behaviours. And I think esports is changing this narrative in a major way, giving gaming its rightful place as the cultural practice of our time. And I think there's a really simple way of understanding this. It has to do with games and game playing. Why people play games and how computer games are a manifestation of this game playing desire is why we find ourselves at this juncture in history, and why it makes little sense to try to put the lid back on digital gaming era. There's no going back, but the good news is that we don't need to switch our board games for computer games. We embark into a world in which a whole range of game playing behaviours exist, and at different points in our life we might gravitate between one or the other, but the point is that esports are all about playing and playing games. So instead of worrying about the prominence of esports and the rise of computer game playing in the habits of young people, we need to work with players and their support teams to nurture healthy gaming behaviours. And again, this is where esports comes in. So if you're worried about your own or a family member's gaming habits, then esports may have an answer for you. By relocating gaming into a social, competitive space, we place safety checks around a player's participation. We ensure that gaming activity happens in public, observed by various support systems that we present in the world that help people find ways of gaming better and gaming healthier. Fellow competitors, team managers, scientists, all sorts of people who are there as a community of care to ensure that they can nurture these habits in a positive direction. Comparisons to the Olympic Games and elite sports more widely are also helpful, as the modern Olympic Games began as a response to a kind of social malaise that was apparent in France in the late 19th century. When Paralympique de Coubertin sought to revive the Olympic Games, it was because of these concerns, because there was a worry that young people had a loss of direction. And this is why the Olympic Games is explicitly a community of and for young people. After each Olympic Games closes, the International Olympic Committee president calls upon the youth of the world to assemble again at the next Olympic Games. And they come together in a single place at a single time to share their experiences through competition. These young people are now assembling around esports in a major way and can really make a difference to the life balance we seek to strike between our digital and physical worlds. And this is because I think there's so much that's of value and interest in that collaboration. Understanding how we can bring these worlds closer together builds a healthier lifestyle. And so by fusing them, by finding that common space, having those conversations about where gaming and physical activity collide, we can find, hopefully, a healthier society in which we can live. And yet there's so much more to say about the world of esport that I think we have to expand that definition even beyond its current manifestations. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about keeping those boundaries of esports loosely defined is that the journey of esports is still underway. To define esports today would be like defining film at the beginning of the 20th century. We would lose so much of what esports can become by seeking to legitimate only one way of thinking about what it is at this present point in time in history. We have to keep those boundaries fluid. And what we know so far is that the means by which we interact with technology is changing really quickly. If we think about esports as just consoles and keyboards, we'll see very quickly that that world of interfacing is changing. We won't have those sorts of platforms and ways of interacting with technology in the future. Consoles and keyboards will give way to gesture control and even perhaps mind control. And a lot of the work in esports is ushering in these transformative experiences, the impacts of which are being felt well beyond the world of esport. We have only just begun to see the integration of artificial intelligence into gaming experiences, and further development in this direction will spawn a huge new era of gaming worlds. And it's not just the technology, it's also our entire media culture at large. Already we see the owners of international sport start to get nervous about the changing behaviours of their audiences, with young people moving away from live television and closer to live streamers. In this way, the wider community of esports professionals is transforming the way we consume media content, the likes of which we haven't seen perhaps since the launch of the World Wide Web or even the television. There is a completely new normal coming down the road for elite sports industries. And in actual fact, we've seen this coming for quite some time. If you think back to the last 15 years of the rise of social media, we've shifted from being relatively passive consumers of content to being active prosumers who are interested in creating our own content around these activities, of being authors in the production of these events, being present within their environments. And in the recent years, we've seen how that's led to a complete transformation of the production of sports events. We see the increased dominance of interactive content. When Tokyo 2020 was postponed in the year 2020 due to COVID, one of the first things that the Olympic Committee did was to work with their new worldwide partner, Airbnb, to create a number of experiences which people could sign into and enjoy. From working out with an Olympian to learning Japanese traditions, everything went online and outside of the arena. Other sports did the same. And we saw tennis, basketball, Formula One make all sorts of remarkable, innovative steps in the direction of computer game playing. Tennis created a virtual tournament where players like Andy Miah competed in a virtual version of the sports. Basketball did this too, and even Formula One racing brought together the worlds of physical racing and digital racing, where the drivers and gamers competed alongside each other. And if you watch these videos of these events, they look just like the physical reality. The gaming graphics are so good, the commentary is so professional, that it looks just like a real sport. And while many of these were experiments, they tell the story of the changing worlds that are operating around our creative and cultural sector. They speak to the ways in which the theatricality of performance is being reimagined through immersive technologies. We see perhaps the most remarkable example of this in the world of cycling, which has already established computer game versions of road races using the platform Zwift. These are all technologies that bring that physicality of sport into the virtual world of computer game playing. And we now see an emerging professionalization of those experiences and international events of high prestige where some of the best riders in the world are competing within these virtual environments. These experiences have each allowed sports to maintain a presence over a year when its playing fields and its arenas were shut down. But even more important than that, it allowed people to explore new ways of engaging people with sports, to transform the public imagination about what being active involves, about being an athlete and how it can be something completely different from what we've seen over the last 3,000 years even. And this is the new normal that I think the world really needs desperately. I'm already convinced that the world will simply switch back into the old normal when everything opens up again and when the pandemic is hopefully behind us. But what we've learned over 2020 is that there are alternative ways of producing culture that allow an even wider range of people to make it their space too. As much as we love to believe that sport, music, theatre, galleries, art are for everybody, it's clear that many people switch off from them very early on in life, and many people don't return to them at all. The production of esports has shown us that there are new ways of recreating these activities, of bringing more people into their worlds, and the technologies that are being developed for esports are making this possible and informing the creative and cultural sector. From the creation of virtual concerts in esports worlds like Fortnite, to the proliferation of gamified exercise experiences that seek to immerse us in remarkable virtual worlds where the simulation of creative fantasy worlds can be the anchor for a rich experience of physical activity, is redefining our expectations of what being active needs to involve. On the face of it, I can see why people doubt the connection between the two worlds of digital and physical pursuits that esports symbolizes. They may look at an esports player or a gamer and see only sedentary behavior. Yet what esports has shown us over the last few years is that the range of aspirations that players have to become better competitors is better facilitated by developing the kinds of healthy lifestyles that we see amongst elite athletes. The best esports players out there are fantastic role models. They lead balanced lifestyles, they exercise, they eat well, they rest properly. And these are among the habits that we need to reintroduce into our digital lifestyles to balance things out, to reinforce the importance of connecting playfulness to our digital social lives. I think a lot of people can identify with the sentiment that their digital lives have become increasingly banal, all-encompassing, and that they would love to completely rethink their digital habits. We see these desires in moments where people collectively sign off digital platforms, either in protest or despair. Yet we also see how much of our lives are becoming digital spaces across a whole variety of our experiences. We know that there's a growing direction of travel within healthcare to bring more of our services into those worlds, into those digital spaces. The only way that healthcare services can sustain an aging, increasingly challenging population, because we're living longer and we encounter a whole range of other illnesses as a result of that, is by bringing healthcare into the digital world. The WHO in 2020 launched its first digital healthcare worker to address some of these problems, inviting patients to interact with an AI-backed avatar to help them towards healthier behaviors. These technologies are intimately related to the innovative culture of esports. And we need to learn from esports that normality needs a shake-up. We need more creative work to bring the digital and physical worlds closer together, to rediscover a balance that's fit for the future. And while on the face of it, you might think that the more gaming isn't an answer, that esports is in fact a detrimental consequence of gaming culture. But I think what we're seeing already is evidence to show that esports is the right kind of gaming. Not only can it transform existing detrimental behaviors into positive life-enriching experiences, it can also usher in a new generation of creators, performers, and innovators. Back in 2019, the world's most advanced artificial intelligence program competed once again against a human to see who was the smartest. Once again, the computer won. Only this time they weren't playing chess or the ancient Chinese game of Go. They were playing StarCraft 2, a major esports title regarded by many people in the world to be the most complex game. And Google's AlphaStar program came out victorious. The ripples of these waves of innovation reach far beyond whether or not you enjoy watching esports as a spectator or even playing them. They're waves of creativity and experimentation that show us what's possible in a world where many things that seem improbable are rapidly being brought to fruition. It's for all of these reasons that I think that esports are changing the world. And the biggest question the world faces is how best to respond. I feel strongly that we need to work within esports developers to ensure that the health and healthcare sector remain central pillars of the esports proposition, to find ways to support players and communities create and maintain inclusive and healthy spaces in which to compete. By opening up the world of sport to esports, we send a message to the youth of the world that we understand their gaming culture, that we understand why this is important to support and to nurture in a way that allows them to flourish. And we need these changes also to remind people that this old normal that we've left behind isn't a place we want to return to. We want to take the habits of this last year that have been positive, that have been enriching, and carry them forward into the future.